Great, thank you so much, David. So a couple of upcoming events here, just to let everybody know, like we always do for study hall. So right after this, about 2 hours from now, will be Megan and Noah doing another Hog 4 session. They'll be covering the M&Ms of Hog, which I believe is macros and I forget the other M. Macros and something. Tune in in 2 hours to find out. And mayhem. And then next Thursday in this time slot, Mr. Gonsman will be presenting, and I didn't get the title quick enough to put it in here, but I will let him speak for just a brief moment since he's with us about what he's going to do next week.
Sure. Thanks, Rob. We're going to go over displays management, just best practices for laying out your displays, what things go well together, ways to keep you efficient and quick. So we'll see you then.
Great. And then next week, the Hog session is Bridging the Hog, and that will be about networking, as far as how to use HogNet and FixtureNet, and when to use each of those and how those can help you in your workflow. So why don't we go ahead and start the recording, David, if you would, please.
We are recording and ready to go.
Thank you so much. So this week, we are going to cover objects aiming and XYZ palettes. And then just as a brief reminder about where we've been, if you're tuning in for the first time, just a quick summary of what our previous sessions have been. So in session 1, we did kind of a general overview of navigation, how to move the camera around, keyboard shortcuts, different display quality options, and kind of how to understand 3D environments in general. And then 2 weeks ago, in our session 2, we started from a new show file. We looked at patching different types of fixtures. We looked at the different ways to remove them. And then we started to get into the augmented edit mode. So those are both available on our YouTube channel, our study hall YouTube channel. So this week, we have quite a long list here. We'll see if we can get through it all. If we don't, then we'll just push stuff on to the next session. We're not going to rush through to make sure we cram everything in here. We want to make sure we get through everything at a speed that's helpful to everyone and get everybody's questions answered. So the goal this week is to look at adding objects and working with those, looking at some more of the display tools that are available in the editor, and then look at aiming static fixtures, which we put off last week. When we get there, we'll mention that. And then if we have time at the end, we're going to get to XYZ focus palettes. And then moving forward, so our session 4, we'll look at staging mode, some a little bit more advanced edit mode options, and scenic element channels, as well as how we can use augmented to build magic sheets or vice versa. And then a little later on down the line, we'll look at FPE and how we can use that. Focus Wand, which is the tool built into our RFR app. And then we'll look at some ways we can integrate Vectorworks with Augmented. Okay, so let's share my screen here. And we will pick up, here we go. We will pick up where we left off last time. So last time we did have to cut it just a little short. We ran out of time. So this is our model in the kind of messy state that we left it last time. It is not our intention to share this file with you guys. It's you can easily build it yourself, and it's not critical that the lights are in the same place or anything like that. In a few minutes here today, we're going to open up a new file, which you will be able to have access to. And I'll talk about that when we get there. We are on beta version 3.0 build 345. This was posted yesterday to the forums, so it is hot off the press. So we'll be working with that beta build this week. And David said this as well, but just a reminder, if you're following along with us live, or if you are with us live, it is not our intention that you follow along with what we're doing in here. If you're watching our recording after the fact, then you're welcome to do that. And then just a reminder to use the Q&A box for questions, and as we've done before, we'll have several question breaks throughout as we go. Okay, so to get back into where we picked up last week, so we'd added in all of these fixtures, which we looked at how to do that in Patch. We looked at how we can move them in the editor, which then corresponds with Patch, like those two are linked together. So now we're going to work with some objects. And objects are a bit different. I'm just going to open my editor here. Objects are different in that they really only exist in the model. So everything that we do to manipulate them will happen here in our edit mode. They are not reflected in Patch. When we get to scenic objects, there is a way to tie those together, but it's not the same as fixtures. So fixtures are handled separately, and we covered all of that last week. Okay, so to bring in our first object, we're going to start with stock objects, and then we'll look at how we can import our own objects from an outside source. So over here in our library, which defaults to being on the left, there is a stock folder. And in here, there are a host of shapes and objects. Just to look at, we're not going to bring all these in, but there's some architecture. We've got walls, stairs, drapes, is curtains, like soft goods that you can use. We'll close these. There are some, there's a kitchen sink in case you need that. There's a ladder, a TV stand. So there's just kind of a good smattering of objects that you can use to pull in quickly to represent things in your space. So the first thing we're going to bring in is under our shapes folder. I'm going to go to 3D and open up Cube. And I have several options here. The only difference on these is the color. Currently, we are not able to change the color of an object once it's in the model, but some of our shapes, we do have different color variants here. So,
hey, Rob.
Yeah.
Can I just jump in for one quick second, because I know there are going to be questions about that. Those are the colors that we're starting with. We absolutely have an item on our to-do list to allow you to customize colors. It will not be part of the 1.0 release, but it's something that is a very high priority for whatever comes right after 1.0. Just to head off the questions that I'm sure are coming.
Sure. Thanks, Lowell. Okay, so to bring an object into our space, we can either right-click on it and click Create, or we can just left-click and drag it into our space. And that is going to drop the object at the origin of our model. So it's at our XYZ000 location. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. And I'm going to switch off local and go to move here to start. And again, we looked at all these tools last time. So here I have this square. Let's kind of get looking at it from the front. So I can drag this around. I do have snap on, so it's moving in those 6-inch increments that we worked with last time. So I can move it on the X, on the Y. I can move it on the Z axis, just like I can with a fixture. I have all the same tools here in my inspector that I do with fixtures. So I can type in a position, and I can say 0 here to reset that back to the 0x axis if I need to. I also have this move object to ground plane shortcut, which is pretty handy. So if I click on that, it will put the bottom of the object right on my ground plane, even if the origin of that object is not at the bottom. So this object, for example, the origin is in the center of the cube, but using that button puts the bottom of the cube flush with my ground plane. So I can also scale this object. So maybe this cube isn't the size I need. So if I come over to my scale tool, last time we just looked at scaling the floor, the ground object. And remember, we cannot scale fixtures, but we can scale objects. So now that we have an object here, let's look at that. So I can use my handles. So here's my X, green is Y, blue is Z. So I can kind of make this whatever shape I need to. And then I can also use the white handle to scale proportionally in all 3 directions, which is pretty handy with objects. So if I have something like a ladder or a kitchen sink, like we saw in there, it's going to look correct. It won't be skewed one direction or another if I use that proportional scale. And then in the inspector, I want to draw your attention to the scale boxes here. So I can, as a reminder, we can hover over and slide. I'm clicking and dragging my mouse. It's the same functionality as grabbing the handle in the model. But you'll see that scale and size are linked together. So scale is just a multiplier based on the original size. So if I change my scale all back to 1, it's going to go back to where it started. If I needed that to be doubled in all sizes, I could just make it a scale of 2, and then that's going to be twice the size. But they are, scale and size are definitely linked to each other here. Okay, so I can also rotate this cube. So I switch to my rotate tool, just like I could with a fixture. So I can rotate it. Here, we'll turn snap off for this part. I can rotate it on any axis that I want to. And then just also like fixtures, I'm going to go back to move here. I can switch to that local origin. So right now it defaults to being on the XYZ of the space. If I click local, now I can move it on the XYZ of the object. So I can move it based on the rotation of the object. So all the same tools we had for fixtures, but they work for objects as well. All right, so I'm going to zoom out a bit here. And actually, I'm going to reset my camera to home, just so we're kind of all in the same place. So we're looking at it from the front now. There we go. And so some other stock objects I want to draw your attention to are our venues. So if we open up venues, we've got some black boxes. We have a theater in the round. We have a proscenium, a thrust, and a traverse stage. So I'm going to bring in my large black box theater. I'm just going to drag that in and plop that there. And if we look at our size here in the inspector, you'll see it's about 98 feet 5 inches square. And last time we made our floor be 100 foot square. So I'm going to change this to 100. So we're exactly lined up with our floor. And I'm going to make the height be 20 feet for today. There we go. So the cool thing about this object, so it's basically a box, right? But it's different from a cube in that when I rotate around, the wall that I'm looking at that's closest to me disappears, kind of like a two-way mirror. So this is really handy because I can see what I'm doing, no matter what I'm looking at, but lights can still interact with those walls. I can point a light at a wall and it will work correctly. Remember that lights have to have something to hit. The beam of light has to have something in which it intersects in order to work. Otherwise, it's just going to shoot off into space forever. Another thing I can do here, so in my hierarchy, we've got our objects here. I can select them here. If I select my black box and right click, I can expand. And then I get a little expansion arrow here. If I click that, I get theater. And then you can see, if I click on these are the components that it's made up of. So I could get rid of the floor, for example. So I could right click and say delete. Yes, since I already have that floor there. Maybe I didn't want them separate, maybe I don't. I could have deleted my original floor instead. But this lets you, if I needed to make one wall larger than another, I could just expand that wall, for example. These downstage, upstage, stage left, and stage right objects are available in the library as well. So they're right over here at the very bottom. And those are what makes the two-way mirror concept work. So if you're building your own from scratch, just make sure that you put the stage left wall on stage left. Otherwise, the two-way mirror behavior might be opposite of what you want. And once I'm done here, I can right-click on the black box and say collapse. And now it is back to being a single object that I can move around if I need to. Okay, so let's go ahead and get rid of the cube and delete that with the right click. And I'm going to delete our black box as well. And I want to rehome my camera because we've kind of flown all over the place here. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to add a truss for our front of house fixtures. So I'm going to come over here to my library and open up the truss, and I want a square truss. So I'm going to bring that into the space, and it starts out as a small little stick of truss here. And you'll notice that it's kind of half below our floor. That's because the origin, the base point of the truss is halfway up the truss. So currently half the truss is above the floor and half is below. And we'll fix that in just a moment. Also going to point out that the base point on the X axis of the truss is on the end of the truss, not in the center. So when we change that next, you'll see how that behavior works. So to change the size of the truss, I'm going to come over here, and I could do this by dragging in the model, but I know the dimensions that I want it to be, and I want it to be 40 feet long. So my X is going to be 40, and then it's a 12-inch box truss, so my Y and Z are both going to be 1. So 1 foot. 1 foot square and 40 feet long. Because its base point is on the end, now I have 40 feet of truss kind of offset. It's all on stage left here. So when we position it, we can fix that. So I'm going to change my position of the X to be -20. So that's going to put that base point of the truss 20 feet stage right. And now the center of the truss is on my center line, which is what I want. I want my Y dimension to be -18. So 18 feet downstage of my plaster line. And then I want my trim, my Z height to be 26 feet. And because I know where my lights were, that's going to put that right on top of my front of house source fours here. So if we spin that around, you can see those are nicely positioned there. And obviously, this may be something you need to tweak. You could tweak it in the model using our move tools. Okay, so I'm going to home our camera again. So the last stock object the next stock object I want to bring in is another venue. So I'm going to bring in a proscenium. So we're going to bring that in here. And because I was clever last week, you'll see that all my lights are positioned right where they should be. So let's talk about that for a second. So because I positioned, let's get to where you can kind of see. There we go. Because we use that origin point that we talked about, so 0, so my X axis is center line, my Y is plaster line, and my Z is the deck, which is what the origin of this proscenium in the stock objects is. That's why everything is lined up, because we said our front of house fixtures are at a negative Y, they're downstage of plaster line. We said our side lights over stage are at 3 and 11 feet on the Y axis, so they're 3 and 11 feet upstage of plaster line. We have this random Fresnel and Parcan that we played with. We never really put them anywhere, so those are kind of floating in space there. But everything else looks correct here. The last thing I want to do is click on my proscenium, and you can see the floor of it is sort of under the deck here. That's because the floor of the proscenium, which there's a little bit of height to it, is lined up with the 0 of our ground plane. So I'm going to hit my move object to ground plane. That's actually going to raise it up. So it's the bottom of the object here, which is about 3 foot 3 inches and change thick, is on the bottom of my floor. So now we can see all of that clearly. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I do want to fix our side lights. Since when we left last week, we kind of jockeyed them around a bit. So I'm going to do that in patch. Let's arrange our views here. And I can't remember those numbers, but conveniently, I can just click on them. So that was 1 or 11 and 12. And then I know that 13 is actually this one way up here. So if I collapse that so everybody can see, I can see that 11 and 12 have a Y, so an upstage of 3 feet, and 13 is really the one that's in the wrong place. So I'm going to select just 13. I'm going to click position. And I know it wants to be at -10/3 to match those other ones, and then the 18 was already correct. So we can get that over there. And then these fixtures are, let's deselect, start over here. So 14, 15, those look correct, and then 16 needs a little adjustment. So I'm just going to select 16, and I'm going to put that position at -10, and then I'm going to double check. It looks like it should be at 11 and 18. And then I'm going to select all 6 of those fixtures, and you'll see their orientation is kind of all over the place. We're going to play with this with the aim tool in just a moment, but for now I want their orientation to be 0/-45/0, just to get them all back where they should be. That looks good. Okay, so let's go back into live, and we'll go back to full screen here. Okay, so now that we have a proper stage here, we're going to show how we can use stock objects to represent some things. So we'll kind of beat this drum quite a bit, but again, we're not trying to have a photorealistic visualizer of our space. We're just looking for representational objects that can kind of tell us what our real rig is doing in order to make us faster programmers. So you can build your whole theater with stock objects. It may not look exactly right. Things might be off a little bit, but it will be pretty quick and painless. If you want it to be more realistic, you can draft those in, say, Vectorworks or AutoCAD and bring them in. And in just a moment, we'll look at how to bring in external objects. But for now, let's go back into our editor, and I'm going to add a cube again. We'll just keep the blue one. And I want this to be a platform. So I'm going to, let's resize again here. So I'm going to make this be 12 feet wide, 8 feet deep, and 1 foot high. And then I'm going to hit my, I would say my ground plane isn't going to help me in this case, since the proscenium has some height. So I'm going to just raise this up. And for the moment, I'm just going to visually, that looks about right. We'll go into orthographic mode in just a moment and make sure everything is correct. And I'm going to slide that upstage. So I've got kind of a riser there. And now I'm going to go into my music library here and bring in a keyboard. And I'm going to zoom in just a bit. Grab that keyboard again. Put it up where we can see it. So I want that to be sitting on my riser. That looks about right. And you'll see once we go to orthographic mode, sometimes if it looks right here, you can be significantly off, which is why we have that mode. And then I'm going to add a person. We have a keyboard player now. And again, this may not look like the keyboard that is on my real stage, but it was really fast to get that in there. And then the last thing I want to do is add a lamp, because, you know, why not? So I'm going to go to furniture and go to floor lamp, floor round. There we go. And that is going to be back here in the corner. All right, so what I want to do now is, those are roughed in, but I want to go to my orthographic mode to make sure things are kind of squared up. The height of objects will become really important. You can see that that person's floating a little bit. So having these squared up will be really important once we get to focusing light. So I'm going to get my camera right kind of on top of everything, and I'm going to use my left camera button, switch to orthographic mode. So this is really helpful, basically a section view, to see, oh look, my keyboard's floating a little bit too. So I can move that onto my platform. Looks like my platform is actually floating slightly as well. So this is a good way to kind of square things up that you couldn't really see in the perspective mode. There we go. Let's check our, yeah, see our lamp is buried in the floor there. There we go. Okay, and now I'm going to jump back to perspective. And now, if I need to move anything around, maybe I want the keyboard a little further downstage, move the person down with it. Okay. So now we've got some objects that we can point lights at, which is where we're headed with this. So we're going to import some objects from an outside source next, but I think this might be a good time for our first question break. What do we got, Jason?
All right, we have a couple of different questions right now. They keep disappearing on me. Are there any keyboard shortcuts to quickly go between the different tools, such as move, scale, and rotate?
Are there keyboard shortcuts?
No, not for that quite yet. We're going to come back and add some of those in a little bit later. We kind of ran out of some keys. So we got to have some better ways to handle that. But yes, definitely on the to-do list.
Okay.
Yeah, I know there were a lot of conversations about keyboard shortcuts because we'd already used all the keys for ES command line things. So.
Excellent. Can you just go through the process of deleting an object in the Mac version of Nomad? I know it's a little different.
Well, I'll have to defer to Lowell again, too, because I'm not a Mac person.
It should be the same. I think we are discussing a little bit of an issue on the Mac Nomad right now. The delete key should work. I'll take a look at what's going on there. But you always have that option to right-click and do the delete. All right, I'm just trying to open up my Mac over here.
All right. Is there a way to make the near wall disappear in a model that we bring in on our own? I don't know if we'll be talking about this a little bit later, but it seemed to be pertinent to what we were playing with right now.
Yeah, so as I understand it, that would have to be set up when you create that model in, say, Vectorworks or whatever program. I know sometimes that's called faces in those programs, but we will respect that behavior. If you're unable to do that, if it's just one wall, what you might be able to do is bring that model in without that wall, and then use the downstage wall object, for example, in our stock library to replace it, or something like that.
Okay.
But we'll look at that once we get into the Vectorworks section in a few weeks.
Okay. In your opinion, is it better to delete that part of the object, or to make that part of the object separate so you can invisible it if you need to, if you're not bringing it in and you need to chop it up?
That's kind of up to you as far as workflow. We didn't look at that, but we can here. So if I select the lamp, I have an eyeball object here, so I can click that and just hide it. And now it's no longer there, but it is still in the model. So I can reselect it here and then turn it back on. So I would say that's a workflow thing. You could also you could move it somewhere off screen if this is something that you know is going to come back for a different scene or things like that. Now we will look at, in a future session, we'll look at movable scenic objects, and those can be turned on and off visibly through using a channel. So if you're looking at using objects that you want in certain parts of your show, and then you want them to disappear for other parts of the show, that's going to be a better way to do that. Hiding them here in the model, to me, is just a way to, if you think you're done with it, but it might come back, you could do that. Kind of like if you think you're going to delete a queue, you can link around it in case that queue actually needs to come back.
Is there any intention of having an option to have objects land on whatever surface they're on top of? So like when you're playing with that platform, right now the workaround is to make that platform or the Proscenium be our origin, but is there any intention to make that something in the future to be able to just drop it to what the surface is right below it?
I'll take that one, Rob. Yeah, Object Snap is a very interesting thing, and we'd like to add it. It's a rather complicated thing, so it will not be in our first release. So right now we have that ground plane snap to, but definitely being able to snap a fixture to a truss or the keyboard to the riser that Rob drew, absolutely in the future.
Okay. Can we group these objects?
We can. Here, let's look at that real quick here. And we do look at this a little in a future session. We'll look at attaching fixtures to truss, for example. But you can group them if I select those three, and then right-click in my hierarchy and say Group. And now it's those groups. So this will all move together. It will scale together. And then I obviously have the option to ungroup. So yes.
All right. With regards to placing on that truss the Z-axis correctly, as its origin point is halfway into the object, so a 1 foot truss would have a -6 inch and 6 inch above the 0 mark when placing it. Shouldn't it be placed at 26.6 rather than 26? And we're getting into where the origin point is on the truss.
Yeah, was it? I didn't catch the beginning of the question, Jason.
So basically, when you dropped in the truss, it looked like that it was splitting the origin point. So half of it was below the stage, half of it was above the stage or above the origin. And if that's the case, when you raise it up, does it need to be at 26.6 rather than 26 to make it to the proper trim height?
Oh, I see. Yeah. Yes. So when I put in a Z dimension, that's going to be the center height of the truss dimension. So if you want the bottom of the truss to be at 26, then yes, you would put in 26.6. I understand. Yes, that's correct.
And I'll just throw out that, different origin points is something that we'd like to look into in the future. We'll allow you to choose whether your hang is to the bottom of the device or the side or the top. And we'd like to explore.
Okay. We have a couple more questions, but I don't think they're pertinent to this section, so we'll loop back around to them when we talk about them. Okay,
great. So let's move on to how to import objects from an external source. So my example that I have today was something that I found on the internet. So there's lots of, it's akin to like stock photography. There's a lot of websites that have stock objects. Some are free, some you pay for. But this would work the exact same way if you were exporting it from an outside program yourself. Like if you built it yourself in Vectorworks or AutoCAD or any other CAD program. So the way to import an object is we need to go to our browser. So I'm going to open up our browser and start from scratch here. So under File, Import, there are a couple of augmented options here. So the From Vectorworks is specifically for files coming out of our Vectorworks plugin. So we'll look at that in a couple of weeks. But what we're looking at today is a scenic model. So I'm going to open that up, and I've got this on my thumb drive. And I have this indoor plant that I found. So .dae is a Collada extension, and that is a universal file type. So Vectorworks can export to Collada, AutoCAD, a lot of drafting programs can export to Collada, and we've had a lot of success importing from that format in Augmented. So that's why I chose that one today. You can see I've got a couple of SketchUp files in here as well. But today we're going to look at this indoor plant. And when I choose it here, I've got a couple of options when I bring it in. So the first part here is all about scaling. So I open up this menu. You can see that I can scale it 100 times smaller, 10 times smaller to the original size. So just to look at that, the height of this thing is 31 feet, so it's a really tall plant. But we'll scale that once we get into the model. So you can scale it initially. I'm going to leave that for now. You can also make it 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times larger. And you've got feet and inch options here as well. But I'm going to leave it as meters for the moment. And then I do have a, currently, and I was just talking about the ability possibly in the future to change base points of objects. But here we have the ability to change the origin, the base point of the object, basically a one-time chance when you import it. So my options are as model, so that's going to just use the base point that was defined in the outside program. I can put it at the center of the object, so center of all X, Y, Z axes. I can put it at the ground, so basically at the bottom of the object, or I can put it at the top of the object. So for today, I'm going to put it on the ground, the point to be at the bottom of this plant. And I'm going to say, okay, and close our browser. So this hasn't put it in our model yet, but what this has done is it's added it to our library. You can see over here, just adds it at the bottom. So now, if I take this and I drag it in, I have a really gigantic plant here in my model. Let's zoom out a little bit here. And I guess it's like a surfboard. We'll get to that in a second. I did not draw this. I found it for free on the internet. So here we have our same options that we have with any object. So I can move it in 3 dimensions. And again, if I snap to ground plane, remember our ground plane is 3 feet and change below our stage floor. So that's why it's kind of stuck in a little bit. So we can raise it up. And then I definitely want to scale this down to a more manageable size here. Sure, that looks good. So I can check my size over here. My Z is 14 feet. That's still pretty big. A little smaller. There we go, 12 feet, sure. And that is the entire object. So in this case, it's 12 feet on the surfboard thing here. So I'm going to move that. I want this to be back on the back corner of our platform. Little ambience for our keyboard player here. There we go. Okay, so the next thing to look at, let's spin around so we can see it a little better, is depending on how that object was built, I may be able to alter it. So if I come here and right click and say expand, like we did with our black box, I can see that it is actually made up of a plane, the surfboard, and the plant. So I can select those separately now. So I'm going to delete that surfboard thing because I don't need it. And then the rest of this is the folder structure that the object was built in, whoever built this. So I'm going to go ahead and collapse that back down. I don't need to see that anymore. So depending on how your objects are built, and again, we'll look at this more in our Vectorworks session, will depend on what's exposed once you bring it in to Augmented. So just take care in building things. If you bring in a whole venue, with walls and seating and soft goods, depending on how it's built in your CAD program, you may want the ability to turn the curtains on and off or move them independently of the walls. Same with the seating. Maybe you want to be able to take the seating out of your model. So you'll need to be cognizant of that as you're building and exporting those objects in those other programs. We can also, to stay with that example, it may make more sense to export the seating as one object, the stage house as an object, the curtains as an object, or maybe each individual curtain as an object, just depending on how you want to be able to manipulate things in Augmented. So that is so that's the only example I had of bringing in an outside object. I think the biggest thing we'll use this for, at least to start, is probably venues and scenery, and we're definitely going to take a look at that in our Vectorworks session. But if there's any other, I'll do a quick pause here, Jason, for questions before we get into AIM on importing objects.
Yep, we got a couple coming on now. When an object is imported, the default size set to feet and inches, and is there a way to swap between imperial and metric?
I'm not sure. Hey, Lowell, like we looked at how to set the default setting of the software in our setup menu. As far as like today, we're dealing in feet and inches on moving things and setting dimensions. Does that also apply to objects that are coming in?
So this is a slightly tricky question to answer. It kind of depends on file type you're importing. Some file types embed their scale and what they were originally drawn in unit-wise into the file. And if that is there, we will try to predict that and use that. So if you know what you drew in, you can bring that in. Unfortunately, though, it kind of depends on what type of file type you're using. And there was a question about textures that just came in that was very similar. Some file types handle them a little bit better than others. So you can always go and force it. And what I kind of do is when I select an object to bring in, you have that sort of original and scaled field that show you there. Just basically look at the scaled one for the sizes you think it should be. It'll give you sort of the bounding boxes of an object. And if it looks really wrong, then you probably have the wrong unit. And remember that once you bring it in, you can always resize it again using the scale commands inside if something did come in wrong.
Okay. Is there a way, or will you be adding a ratio link for scaling objects? For example, if I input the Z height, will the software be able to scale the X and Y?
That's kind of fun. There is not a way right now, short of using the white scale retention concept that Rob was showing a minute ago, but some form of link and be able to type in 7 feet and do that. Could be fun.
Excellent. I know you'd mentioned this a couple times, but can you just explain a little bit with regard to the local XYZ tab and how that relates to what's on screen?
Sure. So that has to do with when we're moving or rotating an object. So we'll take the plant, for example, here. So its XYZ is the same as the model. So you can see X is going directly left and right, Y is going directly up to downstage. Actually, all of these objects are. So if I turn local off, it's just going to move with in the models, along the models axes. If I rotate my plant, let's say we spin the base of it a little bit. Now what I'm going to be able to do, if I go back to move and say local, is that X and Y have shifted. So I can now move it at, currently it's a diagonal, but it's moving at whatever angle I have rotated the object to. So as I switch between local, or if I toggle local on or off, if it's off, it's just going to respect the XYZ of the model itself, so in those straight lines, and local is going to respect the rotation of the selected object.
Excellent. Do textures import with imported models?
Lowell, how do textures, what are all the rules on textures?
So again, it's kind of based off file type. We bring in every texture we can find. Some file formats do some weird things with where they link textures to. Some file formats embed them all. And I think Collada, which we've talked about a lot today, the DAE format does a really pretty good job about embedding them. But if you're looking for a file type that works best, I guess I would recommend that. At the end of the day, we will do the best we can for importing, and then just substitute with gray for anything we can't find texture-wise, but we will try.
Okay. Rob, when you removed the surfboard in the model, did it also remove the surfboard from the object in the library?
No, it did not. So if I drag that in again, good question, it's going to be just like it was the first time. It's going to be gigantic and with a surfboard.
Excellent. Are you moving the object with the keyboard, and if so, how?
Am I moving an object?
Yeah, with the keyboard.
The keyboard? I mean, the keyboard is an object. I'm not sure I understand.
No, I meant your keyboard, not the keyboard on this.
Can I move an object with the keyboard? I don't think so. Yeah, so the keyboard commands are all camera driven. So this is a mouse-based function, unless I want to come over here and type in a position.
When I was watching when that question came in, Rob, and I think that was just a little bit of web share lag that you were actually with your mouse. It just your mouse was kind of looked like you were doing with the keyboard.
Oh, got it.
That's all the questions relatable to right now. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so we're going to move on to aiming static fixtures. Originally, we had this slated for last week, but it was the aim tool was on the operating table 2 weeks ago. So it has gone through a lot of changes, and it's, I think, really intuitive and easy to use. So we're going to look at that next. And the reason I did it after this is now we have a few objects in our model that we can aim things upon. So I'm going to go ahead and say done. And I do want to keep those changes for sure. I made quite a few changes. As a reminder, if I hit that trash can icon, any changes I'd made since we opened the editor would be lost. So basically, all of our objects that we placed would not be there. So I'm going to go ahead and home my camera and just back it up so you can kind of see. I want to see my fixtures too. That'll work. Okay, so I'm going to make a split screen so you guys can see everything here. And I'm just going to move everything over to the other side except for augmented. If you have two monitors, this is much easier. But if we go into patch here, okay, here we go. So to aim static fixtures, and we'll look at what to do with moving lights in the next section, but as far as aiming static fixtures, so this is a setup function. You do it once. It's not something you're going to do on the command line or with encoders as you're programming. Obviously, they're static fixtures. So I'm going to select 1 through 9, and we've got a couple things going on here from last time. Channel 1 has its beam hidden. Channel 2 has a different gel. So I'm going to clean all that up real quick. I want to disable hide beam, and then I'm just going to get rid of all of our gel. There we go. And I want everything to be a 26 degree, which you'll remember from last time is here in the augmented section of patch. Here we go. Make this a little narrower. And let me move my camera. So there we go. So you can see it on the floor. So right now everything is pointed straight down. You'll see our orientation is all zeros for these 9 fixtures. So how aim works is in patch, and you've probably seen this already. Anytime something is selected, it is turned on to full in the augmented screen. This does not turn it to full in live output on your stage. We'll look at how that works in just a moment. But these things are only happening in blind, essentially, for your convenience, for your configuration. So if I just select channel 2, and I'm just using my next and last key here, in order to focus this fixture, I have to come over here on the augmented side, and again, 2 monitors, very helpful. And I'm going to click and hold for just a moment. And then once I do that, I can drag this around. So this is a left click and hold. And I can move this around, put it on the lamp. And when I let go, you'll see that my orientation is updated on the patch screen to reflect the XYZ orientation. The other thing I want to do is I do want to see shadows. So I'm going to change my quality settings here to realistic. That will help us as we're focusing here. So again, I can, there we go, you can see nice shadow of our plant there. I also have the option to shift click as opposed to a click and hold if I want to. And the reason we require the click and hold or a shift click is that a click, just a single click, can be used for selection. So I could select these 3 fixtures in the model, click and hold. I can move these all 3 together.
Click and hold is also much more helpful on touchscreens.
And you'll see those orientations were updated there in patch. So if I wanted to reset those, I could click my orientation box here and say enter, and then those will go back to all zeros. So for now, I'm going to grab channels 2 and 8, and I want to focus those. Just put those right on our keyboard player here. And notice we can use our command line, just like we've always been able to in patch, and or we can click in our model. So if I wanted to add this channel to it with a click, I can now click again, and it's going to focus there. And you'll see in patch, it's also selected. So really handy when you just want to click, or when you just want to focus something that's on the last light on the pipe, and you can't remember what the channel number is. You can just click it, and it will populate that channel number for you on the command line. Okay. So the other thing we can do, and to make this a little easier, I'm going to take 2 and 8, and I'm going to zoom those down. I'm going to turn those into 14 degrees just so we have a smaller beam to work with. And let's move our camera in a bit. So another tool we have available for us is our height offset. So if I click on the feet of this person, and you can see, let's rotate just a little. You can see it's cutting, the light is cutting their head off, right? Not very useful. But what I can do is left click, and this takes a little finger dexterity, but if I left click and I'm holding my left mouse button and I roll the mouse wheel up, what this does is it sets a height offset. So you can see those little dashed lines coming up. And this height will be remembered. So when I let go, if I click, we'll say over here on the base of the lamp, it's actually going to focus those lights at that height offset off of above where I clicked. So I can also set this dimension here in focus. So that height was about 4 feet and change. So I could change that to say 5 feet. And whoops, let's go back into patch here and select last. There we go. And now if I click here, it's going to be at 5 feet above where I click. So really helpful when you're focusing on people. We'll look at this again with moving lights once we get into live, moving things in live. It works exactly the same way. So the other thing we can do is, or here, let's zoom this back out here. So we've got those fixtures. Let's go into live. So you can see that those lights are off. So they were never on in reality. Actually, they are on here because I screwed that up. Oh, but there. Oh, that's something else. Okay, so let's grab 1 through 9, and I'm gonna say offset odd. So I'm gonna grab fixtures 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9, and I'm going to put those all at 50%. So these are now on in reality on our stage. And now, if I go into here, Hey Lowell, can you mute your mic for me? So now if I go back into patch, so those fixtures are going to remain at they're going to kind of be locked in at their live levels. So they're showing at 50. But now what happens is if I select last, and then I can next, and they're going to pop to full. So this is really useful if I'm focusing a system. So let's go ahead and make this a front light system. So I like to start at center, and I'll try and zoom in. I know it's a small window. So I could focus that one at center. I'm going to say last, focus this one, and my center fixture is still showing here at its live level, which is 50%. Last, so I'll focus that one. Next, next, next. Focus this one. Next, that one. So leaving them on and live is a nice little trick so that you can focus one at a time, but still see where they are in relation to each other. So kind of as a quick review from last week, I do want to shutter these off my Proscenium. So I'm going to go to my shutters here, and I can give that a little bit of a rack. Open that up. I'm going to go to channel 1, which is our first one. Shutter that off the other side. And now if I select all 5, I can change my beam edge. We looked at this last week as well. I'm going to put that at 25%, soften those up just a little bit. And for my purposes, is what I'm planning to use Augmented for in my programming today. This is really great. Maybe in real life, I have a bottom shutter cut in. Maybe I don't need that to be in the model today, so I'm not going to spend the time doing that. Kind of throughout this, obviously we've said this a few times, but it's how much it doesn't need to be photorealistic if you don't need that for your workflow. If you do, great, spend that time to tweak and perfect. And if you don't, we have a lot of these tools you can rough it in, and it's going to give you a really good indication of what's happening without being photorealistic. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to look at here is just to kind of show how my OCD works. So if I look at my orientation, so this one's at 51.2, this one's 50.5. So if I wanted to square those up, I could select orientation, and I'm going to say 50.8 is a good average, sure. And then slash, whoops, wrong slash button, slash. So that's going to set all 5 of those to have an X orientation of 50.8, which will just kind of align those across the stage there. Their Y is all at 0, that's fine, and then their Z's need to be different because their pan is unique to each fixture, of course. So you can do little tools like that. Let's look at one more thing here. So if I grab 11 through 16, so that is our side light. So our front light's going to go to its live level here, so that's 50, and our side lights are going to go to 100% because they're selected. So we can still change things with our command line here in patch. So these are set to a -45. We set those last time. Maybe they need to be tipped up a little more. So I could set those to /-55. And those are all tipped up a bit more. And maybe that's good enough. Maybe I don't need to grab each fixture individually and move it with the mouse. Maybe visually this is all I need today. So however, you've got different options for how precise or how general you want to work. Okay, so we're going to, I'm going to keep going before we pause for questions. The next section is about how to aim and focus moving lights. So it's a lot of the same topics here, and then we'll pause after that and kind of talk about all the aiming tools.
Rob, before you leave, can I just throw one quick thing in there?
Yeah, sure.
Stick beams do work inside here, and I found them quite useful. If you turn on stick beams selected for when you're doing slides, it just is another way to see which one you're working with.
Cool. Yeah, I've got. We cover stick beams in a minute, and I will jump back in here to look at that. Yep. Okay. So we're going to save this file if you want to. I guess I will save it, but I just wanted to show you the save options here. So if we go to Save As, and I'll just put it here on my thumb drive. So we've got a few options here that are new. So we have 3 different file types, 3 different EOS show file ESF options now in 3.0. So the first option, the default, is to save it with the model. So this is going to be the largest file size, because it's including all the model information, all the objects, all the everything in the model, the camera information, and that's .esf3d. We can save only the show data, so that's a .esf2 file, so that will not include any of the model information. And then we can also save it as a standard .esf file, so if you needed to open it on an older version of software, you could save it as that file and do so. Obviously, none of the model features are going to be in there because previous versions don't have access to that. But yeah, all of your show data, your cues, your patch, everything will be in there. Lowell, I just want to confirm, if I save as a .esf2, all of the position information will be there, correct?
That's correct. There's nothing.
So the ESF3D is really just the things that only live in the model. And that's what we said before, fixtures are handled, just they have special handling because they're in patch and the model. So things that are only in the model, you'll need to save as a 3D file. So I'm going to save this for posterity. Okay, and now I'm going to open the fashion show file. So in session 1, we started with this file. I'm going to go back to it. This is a file that is available on the Augmented website. So etcconnect.com/augmented is a downloads area, and there are 3 different venues here that Lowell's put together. So there's a concert venue, kind of a rock show, there's a fashion show, which we're going to go into, and there's a proscenium. And they each have their own fixtures that are hung. Nothing is aimed. None of the static fixtures are aimed in those files. So that's certainly something you can, maybe the first thing you'd want to do with is play with that with the aim tool. So I'm going to go ahead and open that file, and we will move on to our next section here. So it sounds like we have quite a few questions. So why don't we go ahead and stop for a few before we move on.
All right. So yeah, I have a couple of questions here. Similar to the way the focus handles work, is there a plan to add a feature that lets us focus a system in proportion? For example, grabbing all sides and setting a distance across the stage that propagates without converging in a single location. Obviously, you can do that with the command line, but we're looking to see if there's a mouse or touch option the way there is with moving lights.
The first thing I'll say is, so we looked at how to fan position. So we said, this range of channels at X value through X value, and you can have Y and Z in there as well. So that was covered in session 2. That functionality currently does not work for orientation. So there is at this moment not a way to do that on the command line. I know that's on the list. Lowell, is there any plans or thoughts on a mouse-driven version of that kind of idea?
Nothing really concrete. We're focusing a lot on the command line stuff, but definitely something we can take a look at.
All right.
And it sounds like they're looking for the fan functionality that we've had for moving lights.
Yeah, fan
command. And
so one of the things that you kind of alluded to that we're taking a look at is in the future we'll be having another XYZ field for focus point. which would give you some of that functionality to be able to say, focus these at x -5, y0, z0 through x +5, y0, z0, and do kind of a spread that.
In terms of aiming, after you drag click, does it release the fixture that it stays focused, or do you have to deselect the fixture to prevent yourself from refocusing it again?
No, as soon as you let go, that data is stored.
Okay.
Now, the fixture is still selected, so maybe that's the question they're asking. So you do have to be careful, and actually I'll do that a lot when we're focusing moving lights here in a moment. But you have to be careful not, like if you're done with the fixture and you're moving on to the next one, you have to make sure to release the selection of the previous fixture.
Okay. The height offset on, is that applied to all instruments or just the instruments you have selected when you activate it?
It does not go backwards, so it applies to anything that you have selected and you're focusing at that moment, and then moving forwards, it will apply to anything in the future.
Okay. When doing the quick save shortcut, what format does it save as?
I believe it's the ESF3D. Lowell, is that correct?
Whatever the last one you saved it as was, so it'll persist whatever it's currently saved as.
Okay.
But I believe from default, so if you haven't specified one, then I do believe it is ES3D.
Okay. So I know we're getting into Vectorworks import a lot later, but just quickly, can you just mention, will it import things like shutters, gobos, color wheels, and position and all that stuff from Vectorworks?
To the best of our ability.
All right.
And that will be, I think I've mentioned this before, and I know I keep saying we'll get there, but I promise we will. The fixture export is kind of a completely separate idea from scenery export. And we will look at both of those in a couple of sessions.
All right. I think that's all the ones that are currently valid right now, and we'll pick up the rest as we go.
Okay, great. Okay, so we've looked at the aim tool in Patch, which again it's in Patch because it's a configuration tool. Once we set it, that's what our fixtures are going to do. So now we're going to move into Live. Let's go into Live here, and I can go back to full screen so you guys can see a little better. If I could click on the right tab, you could see better. There we go. And so again, we are here in our fashion show file. And this seems a little bit laggy, so I'll try and be slow, make sure, or do my best to make sure it's coming across on the webinar. I'm gonna double check because I'm on ultra quality. Let's drop that down to medium, and I do want to stay on realistic for shadows today. Okay, so first thing I want to do, just a couple of housekeeping things for this file, and I'm going to zoom in and show you one of them. So this fixture, so these are color source bars, but you'll see they just kind of look like big scoopy lights. I need to update my fixture library. So if you download the file and you're playing with it, I would recommend doing this. So I'm going to jump into Patch. I'm going to go to Fixtures, and you can see the asterisks in front of these fixtures. That indicates that there is a newer library. There's a newer fixture profile in the library than the one that's currently stored in the show file. So I want to update all, and I think we've said this before in the previous session, but this, if you're in a currently running production and it's working fine, it is not recommended to do this because sometimes this can affect playback. But here in virtual land, no problem. I'm gonna click OK, or if you're starting the programming process, that's a great time to update your fixture profiles. Okay, so I wanted to do that. And now if we go back to our model here, let's be in Live. Great, and now you can see that the actual model, those look a little bit more realistic now. So part of what was updated in that fixture profile was the actual model data for augmented. Okay, so I'm going to go to bookmark 3 for a lot of today. It's just a good way to see the side of our stage. And for the moment, I'm going to turn on, and we're going to go into depth on all these, but I'm going to go to medium ambient light. It's a little bit easier to see here. Okay, I'm going to do a sneak to get those turned off. Okay, so we're here in our fashion show model, and just to show how things are, how we can use augmented to select fixtures. So we've looked at this in patch, we've looked at this with objects, but let's bring this all together now that we're in live. So if I click on this fixture and then say this fixture, if you watch the command line, you'll see it is adding those onto our command line. If I click a fixture that's already selected, it will remove it from the command line. I can add it back in. I can also use my command line, so I can say plus 27, and it will select that fixture. So it seamlessly integrates with the command line, however you want to select fixtures. If I double click a fixture, it will deselect everything except that fixture. We'll be using this a lot once we get into focusing, and then I can continue to add other fixtures. I can double click just to get to one. If I double click on a non-fixture, so I'm going to just double click on our floor here, it will deselect everything. So that's a nice little shortcut to get everything off your command line. Fixture, so just like we always have, the order in which you select fixtures matters. So I have a row of color source linears along my floor here. So if I select those from left to right in my model, it's going to say channel 125 through 101. Or if I double click somewhere to deselect everything, if I select them starting on the other side, it's going to be 101 through 125. And this also applies if you're clicking single fixtures. So if I deselect those and I click here, click here. So that order is going to be respected for channel selection, for doing gradients, for running effects, groupings, and all that. That has always been there. It's just now we have a visual way to do that. So an example of how this might be useful is I'm going to reselect my linears here. I'm going to say at 0 through full and do a gradient. And then maybe there's a person standing here. So I just want to grab those 3 and turn those off. And there's a person here. I want those 3 off. So without knowing any of those channel numbers, I can just quickly grab and manipulate them. Maybe these 2 need to be at full. So just a really easy way to work with your space here. So anything, all of our tools that have been here forever will continue to work. So select last, select manual, select active, all your query tools, those will all those selection tools will continue to work and will be reflected in your model. So for example, if I say query, I can remember my keyboard shortcuts, there we go. If I query all of my SolarFrame 750s, now those are all selected in my model. I didn't have to go through and click each one. So maybe I'll do offset even. I'm just going to grab every other one. And what I can do now, let's turn those on. That would be helpful. So full. So now to focus these lights, I can use my encoders or my ML controls like I've always been able to do. But I can also click to focus, just like we were doing with aim in patch. So this is, of course, for moving lights. So the biggest difference is we are now here in live. We're no longer in our patch. We're not editing our patch file. We are programming at this point. So let's do a little bit of a split screen here with our live display so you can see those as well. Let's do that so you can see pan and tilt. So as I click around, you can see those pan tilt values are changing. So this works the same way as our aim tool did. So it's a click and hold briefly, or I can do a shift click if I don't want to hold. And then once I'm there, I can continue to hold my mouse button and drag fixtures around. So again, this is manual data. This is, as far as the data is concerned, just like moving my pan tilt encoders or using my ML controls. And then from here, I could store this as a queue, as a palette, to any of my record targets. So I want to quickly give us let's go back to full screen here. I want to give us another thing to focus on. So I'm going to go back into my editor. And in Lowell's beautiful fashion show here, I'm going to add a picnic table because it's in here and I can. Oh, and I did this last night too. And I was like, oh, this will be good to show. So I can't remember which section the picnic table is in. There is a search box up here. So if I type picnic, or the first few letters of picnic, it's going to show up here. So that's a quick way to search the entire library with that search box. We hadn't looked at that yet. So I'm going to drag that picnic table in here. We're going to put it over here and up on top of our stage. And then I want to add I'm going to clear my search to get my whole library back. I want to add a person on top of that table. And this is going to give us some height to work with. And that looks pretty good. I'm going to double check using my my ortho just to make sure.
Some high fashion there, Rob.
What's that?
Some high fashion you got going on.
That's right. All right. I'll come back to perspective here. And these are all tools that we looked at in the previous video, so I'm not going to spend the time to explain them all here. Okay, so we can close that editor. And let's just go back to bookmark 3. Okay. So if I click on, let's reselect our fixtures. There we go. Oh, hey, Lowell, I don't know if this is I found this last night too. Like a label keeps popping up. I don't know if that's a bug or if it's something with my keyboard, but anyway. We'll try select last up here. There we go. Like the shortcut for select last and label both use L, so I don't know. Anyway, a little note for you. Okay, so I've got select last. I'm going to click on our person, and we are going to set that Z offset, that height offset, just like we did with aim. So I'm clicking and holding, and I'm going to roll my mouse wheel up here, and I'm just going to manually set this here, and I'm looking at the shadows here to kind of make sure I've got a headshot. There we go. That looks great. And so conveniently, because I know our models are all the exact same height, this is going to work perfectly. So now if I click, say, over here, those fixtures kind of look like they're all over the place, but had there been a person standing there, it's maintaining that height offset. So if we come and click on the picnic table, it's going to hit that person in the head as well. So this is really helpful if you have stairs in your model or anything like that. It's going to take into account the height of the object you are clicking on and then do the offset from there. So in this model, actually the stage floor is a foot or two above our origin. So out here, that's actually at a 0 height. And then our stage is a little bit above that, and our picnic table is above that. but it works everywhere because of that height offset that we did. And this also drives home the idea that you have to have objects to click on. So if I didn't have the picnic table here, this wouldn't really be able to work, because if I clicked between their feet, it would assume that I was clicking on the stage itself. So having even the simple representational objects is critical to making this work correctly. And so the focus height offset here in our focus menu works just like aim. I can come in and manually set that to, say 4 feet. And now if I click, it's going to be 4 feet, so just a little low on that person. And then while we're in there, I'll show this other option we can toggle on off. So animate, pan, and tilt defaults to on. If I turn that off, and I'm not sure if this will play on the webcast, but if I click, those lights will just appear where I click them. I won't see them swing into place. So that's just a graphics thing. Obviously, your real lights are going to swing into place. So I turn that back on, and now I'm going to watch the beams animate into place. So I do want to leave them over here for our next point here. But I'm going to go ahead and pause here for a moment and see if there's any questions about click to select or focusing moving lights in live here.
Got a couple, not too many. Question about using click to hold. Does the mover's focus tilt first then pan, or is there any rhyme or reason to how they get to the position?
I believe it will take the shortest path. So, and this sounds like it's related to our flip command. So if we watch these, like you'll see them kind of jump. So I made it do it once. I don't know if it worked on there we go. So they're going to take the shortest path to get there. So you may have a light that's backwards from the rest. So using our flip command in the encoder display would be the solution to solve that if that happens.
One note, this is an early question, but a note, but the label bug using keyboard shortcut is Control-L, and if you release the control before releasing the L, you get the label. Just a thing that a couple people had chimed in on during the sequence.
Thanks, guys. I am fortunate enough to have a console in my house, so I do a lot of this on a console, and then I move to Nomad for the presentations, and then I find these things. So thank you.
All right.
So that's a note for Anne, not Lowell. Lowell, you're off the hook.
Hey, Rob, can I just go back to that? Do we pan tilt first? It doesn't matter in Augmented. So Jeff just responded back saying that doesn't answer my question. I've heard always focus, tilt first, then pan, especially when going from a home position. Yeah, that's absolutely true with a real light. Doesn't matter in Augmented. We do them simultaneously. It's setting both those values at the exact same time since we're in a digital world. As soon as you move something in one direction, it's doing it for both. If you click to the right, it is going to the shortest distance. So don't really need to worry about it. Side.
Here, I can illustrate that.
From a programmer's perspective, we always try to say, okay, it's always great to have your home position somewhere up on stage. It's always great to build your palettes based upon other palettes. That's all still the same in Augmented. It's still, because it's going the shortest distance, it's always a good idea to work from known positions whenever possible.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, remember, you're programming in X, Y, Z right now, not really pan and tilt.
So this fixture that's selected here, if I use my ML controls, if I pan first, so the reason we say tilt first is if I look at the light on the floor, it looks like nothing's moving, but I can see in the model the light is actually spinning. So that is why we always say to tilt first, because then if I tilt first and then pan, I can actually see it moving. So yeah, if I'm clicking to focus, it's not really a concern because it's going to go where I tell it to.
One question that popped up, and I lost half of it because it went away. You had showed that trick about being able to focus up your entire rig with static lights in the previous section. This came in right when you finished. You had it so that in live you had everything at 50% and you were able to see in patch when you do all those things. The question is, does that still work if you set up all your 50% in blind?
No, it's going to take, so if you're in blind, that means you're working on a record target.
Yep.
So it's always going to take the values from live, because otherwise.
Directly from blind to patch, it actually does work. If you go directly from the blind, if you
I see.
or something in blind that has everything lined up. So that's the workaround right now. So if you can't light the stage up for some reason when you're setting that up, that would be the way to do it. But that again, like Rob said, it has to be a record target, so you have to actually have a queue that has everything at 50% or whatever you want set up.
That is a good workaround though, if you're unable to, for there's a rehearsal on stage or something and you can't mess with stage lights, you could go create a dummy queue that would allow you to keep working on focusing your fixtures.
Okay. And the last question I see pertinent to this is a little bit about fixture parts. I know, Lowell, this is a little bit of a question, but in terms of how fixture parts work when you have a unit with multiple intensities. In terms of selecting and things. Will it do parts of fixture and selection, for example, color 472 with individual cells?
So multi-cell, not multi-part is the question.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Does it allow Lowell? I admit I have not played with multi-cell in here. Can we select multiple cells, or does it only allow us to do the whole fixture?
You're muted, Lowell, if you're talking.
Sorry. Let me try that out real fast. I have to admit I haven't actually played with that in a spell myself, so I'll get you an answer in just a second.
All right. That's all the questions we have pertinent to write this section.
Okay. Well, here I'll move on, and when Lowell has an answer, you can jump back in for us. Okay. So I'm going to deselect everything here. The next thing I want to do is cover all of the menus that we have over here. So a lot of these we covered in the edit mode, and they are exactly the same. So I'm not going to cover those again. So obviously edit takes us into the edit mode. Camera, all of these things are exactly the same. We've looked at these at least once, if not twice before, so I'm not going to go over all those today. Focus, we just covered those couple options. So labels is our next big one here. So what I want to do here, how did I record a queue? Okay, so what this will do is, let's say all. So this is going to add a label on each fixture that shows the channel number of the fixture along with the current state of its intensity. So, so 34 and 32 have manual data. The rest of these don't, most of these are white, which means they don't have data. Is that, hey Lowell, can you mute your mic for us? So in addition to seeing the channel number here, I can also grab the fixture using that box. So it just gives me a little bit bigger target. All of our selection tools work exactly the same as the fixture themselves. So I can deselect, I can double click to select only that fixture. All those tools work the same way. So I'm going to turn on some lights, and then we'll look at some other options we have here. Actually, let's finish this first. So I'm going to turn off these. So I have the option to have just movers. So it's only going to show fixture labels for movers. Only selected fixtures, which right now I only have that channel 3 selected, or only active fixtures, which right now nothing's on. So that didn't give me anything. And we can also combine those. So let's take a look at that. So I'm going to go to queue out just to reset all my movers. I want to see, I'm going to turn these 3 on, and they don't need to be pointed anywhere for this example. And let's turn on these 3 pars. And then I want to select a mover that's on, a par that's on, and a par that is off to kind of show how these work. So if I go back to my labels menu, I can say all, and again, that's going to show everything. I can say just movers. I can combine these and say selected movers. So that's going to only be that fixture. I can say just active movers. Or I can say selected and active fixtures. So whichever combination works for you, you're welcome to click those. All of these, we'll get to this next, but all of this information is also stored in snapshots. So I'll just mention that right now. So the next one down in our column here is beam center labels. So if I move my camera, let's turn these labels off for the moment. If I move my camera down here to where I can't necessarily see all my fixtures, but I still want to know what my channels are, beam center labels might be useful. So I have the same options here, but what this does is it puts a channel selection box at the center of the beam, so halfway between the fixture and wherever the beam is hitting. So if I say, okay, I want this light, I can grab it there, even though I can't really see it at the top of the screen. And then I've got 2 selected, that's okay. I can move those, I can refocus them. You'll notice the 24 and 25, the labels are moving as well. And that's because the center of the beam is moving as I move it around on my stage. So I have the same, I can do movers only, I can do active movers only. The combinations work exactly the same way. So this is, if I say active movers, and I say, okay, I want to move this fixture, I'm going to double click, and then I can refocus that fixture. And now I want to grab just that one. Oh, I got both of them. Double click. Well, I'm assuming these should be highlighted gold, like the other fixture labels do.
Yeah, I just noticed that. I'm not sure what's going on there. That might have been we just added that feature where when you have them overlapping, they merge together into a larger box, and I think we may have just nicked something there.
Oh, sure.
Make sure we take a look at that.
So I can also, like with my selection of fixtures themselves, I can draw a box. It's probably hard to see for you guys, but I'm just click and drag to drag a box around those 3. And then I have selected all 3 of those. So that functionality also works with the labels. Okay. So I need, the other thing these show is, if I say, just to show the colors, if I say record Q1, those values are going to change to reflect the same color conventions that we've always had. So it's blue, it's Q1, so these values are moving up from nothing. So that's why these are blue. If they were moving down, they'd be green. If they're manual, they're red. All of our standard color conventions apply here. So I'm going to go to Q out here. Maybe. There we go. And I'm going to, let's zoom out a bit here and grab these 5 fixtures. And turn those on. Let's turn off our beam labels for a minute here. So the next one we're going to look at is focus handles. So this is a kind of a little blob, a shape at the place where the beam intersects an object, where the end of the beam intersects an object. And this is another selection tool. So for this example, I'm going to zoom these out a little bit. There we go. And what this lets us do is I can select the fixture. So right now I'm deselecting, or I can double click to only select that fixture. And I can click and drag, so I can focus it here. But whoops, forgot to double click. So again, a double click is going to just select that one. If I just do a single click, it's adding it to the selection. I mentioned that earlier, just to remember to do that. You'll notice that the moving lights have circles and my static fixtures have squares. So while I can select static fixtures here, I can't move them because they're static fixtures. So that's what that indicator is for. So for the moment, I'm going to just have movers. Let's just do active movers. I just have these that are on. So I'm double click. So I'm going to make a little V formation here with these movers. So the advantage of focus handles is so I'm going to select all 5 now, is when you have multiple units selected and you grab and drag, the positions will be respected between the selection or within the selection. So I can move this V, this shape, anywhere I want to, and it will keep them in that V pattern. So if I've got a few fixtures here and a piece of scenery moves, or I just need to slide an idea, I don't have to do it one fixture at a time anymore. I can grab these focus handles and slide them all together. Okay. See, we talked about that. Oh, and so the last thing on here is the label button here. So I also have the option with focus handles to add a label next to the fixture. The little arrow is just showing you, if you have a bunch clustered together, it makes it a little clearer as to which fixture that number refers to. And just like our other ones, I can use these boxes as the selection tool. And this is just a toggle. So if I don't need those labels, but I still want to keep my focus handles, I can turn those off. And just so we have another cue here, we'll need this in a little bit. I'm just going to record this as Q2. And you'll see those labels turn, or the focus handles turn blue again to respect those color conventions that have been in our live display forever. And then all of these options there's a restore defaults button here at the bottom. So if I've got a bunch selected, and obviously we can use these together. So maybe I want active movers on all 3. Maybe I want all movers up above, and then just maybe I don't want beam labels, but I want active movers down on the floor. You can play with any combination of these that you want to. That's helpful for you. And then my restore label defaults button basically just turns everything off. It's a quick way to knock everything out with one click. So the last menu, or the next menu here, is our sticks menu. So stick beams, or if I'm going to say all for just a minute. So this draws a stick of where the light is going through, from the center of the fixture down to where it intersects whichever object it's intersecting. So let's look at just movers, or let's do active movers here for a second. So this is a good way to kind of see where things are intersecting. Like you can see all those, the center of these lights are hitting this person right in the chest. If I click over here, I think this is a good way to help understand why things don't line up on the floor. They are lining up where you click. Come out here, make it a little more obvious. But they're intersecting at that height offset that we set. So they're coming together at that point above the ground. It illustrates that in a nice way. Probably one of the most powerful things about stick beams is if I'm in a live show setting. So if I turn those fixtures off, oh, and my sticks are on active, so I'll need to, let's go to selected here. They went off because they were no longer active. So from here, so my fixtures are off, and on my real stage, they're not outputting anything. I can refocus these, and that looks a little low, so I'm going to change my height offset up to there. And then if I say full sneak, enter, those are going to fade up right where I pointed them. So if you need to do something on the fly in darkness, we can now do that. These also work in blind, so if you're working ahead in your model, you could use them that way as well. Now this is where the data you put into your model creation is going to really pay off. If your table in real life, your picnic table, is a foot off from where it is here, you're going to start to see those sort of things. The lights may be a foot off. So the more accurate your model, we'll harp on this till the end of time probably, the more accurate your model, the more accurate results you're going to get out of these tools. So and we wanted to look at this in AIM as well. So if we go back to our split screen with patch, slide that back over there. So if we're in patch and I have stick beams, we'll just say selected, which it is, okay. And I choose, I don't know these channel numbers, but I don't need to because I can just click them here. So now we're in the AIM tool. We're no longer in live, but that stick beam is going to be active in patch as well, which is a nice way to hit that person directly in the head or the corner of the table. It's just a way to add a little more accuracy for aiming static fixtures. And then I can turn that off if I want to. All right, so let's go back out into live, back to full screen here. Okay, any questions about any of those tools? We've got a couple more lighting tools to look at here, but why don't we pause here for a moment for questions?
All right, not too many right now. Can you select multiple fixtures and just have the tilts and change all their tilts in Augmented?
And just change their tilt?
Yeah.
So that would be, our good old encoders or ML controls if you really just wanted to affect the tilt. So the main tool of how to focus in Augmented is the click to focus. If you're looking for fine tuning, that's when our encoders are going to do what they've always done really well.
Okay.
And that which brings to a good point in general is that, again, if your model isn't 100% accurate, then you're going to have to do some tweaks. So we're not saying I'm going to click here, select those fixtures, and click over here, and now I'm done, and my show is perfect. Like more than likely, if I look at my actual stage, I'm going to have to roll this fixture up a little and this one over a little, or make some tweaks. But I can select 20 fixtures, click, and get them 85% of the way there, which is a huge time savings versus one at a time, pan tilt, pan tilt, pan tilt. So just a good general note about point to click. Okay.
You talked a little bit about snapshots. Can you snapshot just the label command and not affect the camera position? Just so you can turn labels on and off and have your settings turn on and off?
Currently, no, and we're about to get to snapshots, so I'll talk about that. The answer is currently no. Snapshots will store everything in the Augmented tab. But we'll look at that in just a moment.
Okay, one more question we have related to conventional fixtures. If you have two fixtures patched onto one channel, can you solo each one for the purpose of shutters and aiming?
Yes. So in patch, and I think we looked at this last week. as far as we didn't look at focusing them, but we looked at a gobo or color. So in patch, you just need to make sure you only have that part selected. So if you have three dimmers in a channel, just make sure you have part 1 and you can aim it independently of the other 2.
Hey, Rob, now we do have to select that from a command line.
Oh, okay.
To do that, and that's just something we're working on, the part structure.
Great. So in the model, if you click 1, it selects all 3, for example.
Yeah, because traditionally you can't select an individual part. You have to select the full thing for control. There's a little bit of under the hood work that needs to be done to make that better. So it's not 100% rough there right now.
All right.
Thanks.
I think that's all the questions for right now.
Okay. Well, let's get through. I know we have about 15 minutes left. We should have time to do light menu, and we'll end with snapshots today. And I know it was in the title of our webinar, but we'll have to move XYZ palettes to next week. But that's okay. I definitely don't want to rush those. They're awesome. So just a little teaser there for 2 weeks from now. Okay, so the last couple things on our menus, our light menu here. Let me create kind of a look here real quick. So I'm just going to sneak everything here. Actually, let's go to queue out. Okay, so I'm going to grab all my color source pars. Just going to query them because I haven't memorized these channel numbers yet. And put those at full, and I'm going to make them be blue. Perfect. And then I'm going to grab a few movers. So that first one I double clicked so that I made sure I got rid of my par selection. Actually, I don't want that one. I want these 4. There we go. And we'll turn those on, and I'm going to zoom those out a little. Great. And then I'm going to focus those on our person here, and I want those to be amber. Great. So now we've got a few things to look at, and then I'm just going to have these 2 selected. We'll look at why I'm doing this in just a moment. Okay, so on my light menu, so these options are all just graphical properties. They have no bearing on what is being output to your actual rig. They do not affect your intensity going to your rig in any way. It's just what's happening inside the model here. So beams, I can turn those off. So now I only have light hitting our surfaces. I don't see anything through the air. I can have just movers on, or I can have just selected on, or I could do selected movers as well, which in this case will be the same thing. So that's just something visually you can turn on and off. I can change the intensity, and again, this does not affect your live output levels in any way. It's just here in the model. So I could turn that intensity down to 25. I could and you can also hover over intensity just like we can in our editor with XYZ and drag. It's a little easy to show here. So I can go up to 100 and blow everything out. So 50, which is the default, is a pretty good level in my opinion. But you can set that to wherever you want. So beam intensity is only the beam in the air. The light intensity that we just looked at is in the air and on the floor. So if I change beam intensity to low, it's kind of hard to see it at all. There's medium, and there's back to high. But if I turn this to say low, and then I go back and work with my intensity, that's still going to affect what it looks like on the surface, like on the objects, but it's going to affect what's in the air less. And then I have a haze toggle on and off here. You can just add a little more particulate in the air. And our ambient light, which I think we've looked at before, but this is showing any other light in the space. So that's none at all. I can only see, if I did a go to queue out, it would just be black. I wouldn't be able to see anything. Low, I can see a little bit. I can see the person on the picnic table is there, even though there's not a light on them. I can go to medium or high. I tend personally to bounce between medium and low depending on what I'm doing. If I want to have really nice photos to show a designer or something, I might go to off. Just looks a little more dramatic there, but it's all personal preference. Okay, we are going to record this as Q3. We're going to record everything. So we've got a couple Qs here. So the last one we're going to look at is in our options menu. So we've already talked about the quality settings, so I'm not going to go over that again today. But the pending queue, I wanted to point that out. So we are in Q3, and I don't have a queue before or after this. So I'm going to back up a queue. I'm going to go into Q2. So that actually happened on our stage. I do have the option, and it's kind of an overall, like it affects augmented in general. If I click on pending queue, it is the model will always show me the next queue in my stack. So right now on my stage, we're actually sitting in Q2, but the model is showing me Q3. So you can use it as kind of a preview monitor as far as what's next. If I back up a queue into Q1, so I'm actually in Q1, but I'm viewing Q2 in the model. So if I turn that off, the model is going to snap to be in Q1, which was what is actually on stage. So changing this does not affect your live output, just affects which queue the model is showing you. Okay, so the last thing we're going to have time for today is snapshots. So I did this originally on 2 monitors, and then when I went through it last night, I had to cram it onto 1 monitor, and it was much more challenging. So bear with me as I get this all set up. So I'm going to move everything over to the right frame except for augmented. I want that in the left frame. There we go. And I'm just going to close my patch window. Okay, so snapshots with augmented, and we mentioned this just a moment ago. So they are going to store every visual setting in the augmented tab. And then I'll let Lowell talk about what might be coming in the future at the end of this. So for the first thing we're going to talk about is the camera. So anything the camera is doing, if you're here, angle, position, that's all stored in there. So let's say this is snapshot 1, record snapshot 1, and I'm just going to say enter. So I'm going to store this whole snapshot. So snapshots are still recording all of my screen views like they always have. We're simply adding the augmented component to it. So now my live display over here in this flexi mode is also part of snapshot 1. So I'm just going to change my camera view to be something from the back here. Okay, and this is going to be snapshot 2. So now if I recall snapshot 1, it's going to snap back to that first camera view. If I recall snapshot 2, it's going to go there. And nothing changed over here because this was the snapshot, but we didn't alter it. So just to show that, if I change this to a color picker and now recall snapshot 2, it's going to go back to the view there. So snapshots still affect all of our displays, of course. So the next one I'm going to look at here is, so from this camera view, and I just moved it, which I did not want to do. So I'm going to call snapshot 2 again. So from here, I'm going to add stick beams for movers, and I'm going to lower my ambient light level. And I'm going to record this as snapshot 3. So now if I bounce between snapshot 2 and 3, the camera didn't change because it didn't change when I stored it, but the light levels and the stick beams changed. So I'm going to go back to snapshot 3, back to snapshot 2. And then if I go to snapshot 3 here, and then if I go to snapshot 1, the stick beams were not on here. The light was at that medium level, the ambient light. So those things are all still there. They're all tied into those snapshots. So we are able to only store the augmented tab. So for example, if I come over here and I change, let's just open a color picker. And then in my augmented tab, I'm going to add mover labels, and I'll change my light level to off. Okay, so from here, I'm going to say record snapshot 4, and I'm going to deselect everything except augmented. Here, let's do that, and then reselect frame 1 there. So snapshot 4, I'm going to hit enter. So now if I recall snapshot 4, so I'm going to, before I do that, I'm going to change this view again. Let's open a fader module. And then I'm going to recall snapshot 4. So that's not going to affect the right side of our frame because it's only storing the augmented tab. So if I go to snapshot 1, and then I go to snapshot 4, only my augmented window is going to be affected. And this behavior has been true with snapshots for several software versions. We can narrow those down to frames, to tabs, to monitors. Whatever information you want to store is what will be played back. So we're folding in augmented into all of this. And then we can also do the reverse. So if I come over here and I set up maybe some direct selects down here of groups, sure. If I say record snapshot 5, and then I deselect the augmented frame over here in my tree. So the snapshot 5 now only contains my my direct selects and my live table up here. So if I go to snapshot 1, and then I recall snapshot 5, why did that happen? I think I screwed that up when I stored it. Let's try that again. If I say record snapshot 5, and I do not want to store augmented. See if I can get it right this time. So if we go back to snapshot 1, and then recall snapshot 5, I'm not sure if that is a bug or if that is user error. Could be either one. We're at time. So I will investigate that and report back. This was working yesterday, so it's probably user error. But I do want to leave a few more minutes for questions. I know some of you guys are probably running off to Hog, so thank you very much. If you need to run, we'll be back in 2 weeks, and we'll pick up with maybe we'll touch on the snapshot thing at the beginning, and then we'll move on to XYZ palettes. So thank you if you need to leave. What questions do we have?
We got a couple of questions about snapshots. Will they also store the pending queue info as well? So if you have pending queue active or not, does that get recorded in snapshot?
Yeah, yes, it should. Let's try it. So if we record this as snapshot 6, we'll store everything, and then we go back to snapshot 1. Yep, that does store in there.
Is there a way to change the light intensity of a single light? So if you got some lower wattage lights and some higher wattage lights?
I don't think so. We can turn the beam on and off in patch that we looked at. Lowell, is there something I'm not?
No, not right now. It's kind of an all or nothing graphic setting.
So there is the hide beam, which we looked at last time. You can enable that in patch, so the light itself, like the lens of the light, will still illuminate, but it will not output anything. So you can turn it off channel by channel, but we can't level.
If you have some 300 watt pars and some 1000 watt pars, they both project the same amount of light out of the front end.
Sure.
Yeah, especially in general.
That's looking through. So I think that's all for questions.
Hey, Jason, can I just jump in for a second?
Yeah,
question about a multi-cell fixture that I was looking at earlier.
Oh, yeah.
We do not allow cell-based selection in Augmented. It is going to just grab the entire unit. You still have representatives, so the intensity and the color is all shown, but you need to select it using the multi-cell tools of the command line.
Groups are still very handy.
And I'm still not seeing any more questions coming in.
Okay. Well, for my edification, I want to look at the snapshot thing. Lowell, did you notice anything I was doing wrong?
I didn't, but I'm sorry. I have a small screen and I was having trouble following what you were doing there.
Like if I only want, or if I don't want augmented, it wasn't respecting that. I may have had, when I did this before, I may have had additional tabs. So it may be a tab versus frame issue, but right now it's the only tab in that frame.
Yeah, that I would buy. Also, don't you need to have the frame selected and then you just don't want the tab selected?
It is not allowing me to do that.
Okay.
So I think that might be it. Like if I
That's
had...
probably because of the instance, the fact that you can only have one instance of augmented.
Sure. So like if I have another tab here, like color path, sure. And then I don't store...
That might do it, yeah.
Augmented.
It needs to get rid of augmented because you can only have one.
So if I go to snapshot 1 and then snapshot 5. No, I'll research that and report back next week because it's not doing what I think it should.
Okay. Cool. All right. Well, thanks everybody.
Yeah, thanks guys. So Mr. Gonson will be here next week to talk about workflow and display management in EOS in general. And then 2 weeks from today, which I believe is July 2nd. Is that true? Yes, so July 2nd at 10 a.m. Wisconsin time, we will be back here to pick up right where we left off. So we'll fix the snapshot thing, and then we'll dive into XYZ palettes, and then move into staging mode after that. So next week we'll have a lot of really good topics.